I'll call this order to meeting. Call this meeting to order. And this is Tuesday, June 4th, 2013, and this is a 4 o'clock informational meeting. And I'd like to welcome our viewers and the people that are in the audience here. We will have our first item on the agenda is a land use committee report, and since Chair Rolfing is gone today, is excused, Councillor Karski, please.
You bet. At our land use committee meeting, we had 3 different agenda items. First one was on a barking dog ordinance. Attorney Allenstein was there to present our current ordinance. We talked about how it's enforced, some of the issues. It appears that we have a very good ordinance. It's enforceable, and we will not be making any changes or recommendations to that. Second one was on deer feeding and other various wildlife, turkeys, etc., in the city limits. This is going to be an ongoing topic. We're going to be getting a presentation from Game Fish and Parks at the July or August meeting. It's not a problem over the summer months, but it can become an issue over the winter months when deer congregate and form larger herds. And then our third item was the Arterial Street Expansion Program, and there, Chad Hevey with Public Works, the engineer, discussed how the process is going, where they're at in it, how they compiled the list and the streets that they're going to be working on for the next several years. They presented us with a project list. We're looking at $53.5 million from 2016 to 2018 being spent on arterial street funding. We talked about the plotting fees, the history of them, the dollar amounts, etc. We're going to continue to have them come before us with this project. It's such an important thing for our city and for the council to keep an eye on, and we spend a lot of money on our streets, and it's important that we kind of keep our eye on that ball. Councillor Anderson may have something to add on that. I know it was kind of a project he keeps an eye on. So,
well, I think further discussion in the future will be the formula that has been used to make up that arterial street expansion money. That fund was supposed to be extra money for arterial streets, and in the recent years, that fund has generated the monies that it was supposed to on the sales tax end, not on the platting fee end. But we've also adjusted the main revenue source for arterial streets and have been reducing that. So one of the things that did come out of the UDC was that the developers had requested that amount from the 0.92% be restored to the full amount, and then restoring the arterial fund back to the original agreement. And there's some disagreement among us on that.
Good. Thank you very much. Is there any council open discussion? Councillor Jameson? I'm sorry.
I wanted to add on that deer feeding issue that a couple of years ago we passed an ordinance allowing some archery seasons on the east side. And I don't know if you want or can incorporate the effectiveness of that program along with your deer feeding issue, but it's all kind of related. Parks and Rec handles that with the South Dakota Game Fish and Parks Department, so if perhaps while they're here they could maybe update us as well if that's been effective or not, or if there's changes that need to be done. But as long as we're addressing deer, maybe we could include that part of it.
Sure, we'll request that too. Thank you.
And then I wanted to add, if I could, the audit committee is having a very exciting meeting Thursday at 4 o'clock here. Very exciting. No, the agenda is real slim, but we're just getting some updates. But it's at 4 o'clock here, audit committee, if you're interested.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Councillor Anderson?
Just wanted to say that I spoke with the Mayor's Diversity Council this morning, some of the members, and they made me aware of a new magazine that's being put out here in Sioux Falls. It's quite interesting, I think, because of the uniqueness of the magazine. It's called Lavos Global, and it's printed in several different languages that are spoken here in Sioux Falls. Actually, English, Spanish, Swahili at this time. And with the magazine, you can read one side and it's in English. You flip it over and it's in another language. So they've utilized their spaces quite well. And I think it's a quite interesting magazine to take a look at it as our city grows in diversity.
Thank you. Councillor Staggers, please.
Yes. During the past several days, I've become more aware of the issue of city contracts. There are two specific areas. First of all, we had the farmers market, which was being held down by Coles, now being shifted to Yankton Trail Park. And in the process, this was approved by the Parks Board, and then eventually the mayor signed this contract. I've always been concerned about contracts that have been approved by a non-elected body, like the Parks Board. Now, maybe we shouldn't be approving something like that, but we ought to have some kind of standards for when we are involved and not just exclusively having the Parks Board do it. And then finally, people do continue to mention the issue of FEMA, wanting to know how's that going to be dealt with. Will the City Council have any involvement in this, or will it be purely an administrative issue? And I don't know if anybody has any insight to those issues or not, though.
We will, what we'll do is at our meetings that we have on Friday, I believe I have a meeting with the mayor scheduled, Councillor Karski and we will get some answers to those questions.
Okay.
Okay. I know they're going to be with us at the end of June with the report as far as where we're at, as far as the dollars, the total dollars. It's my understanding they hope to have a final number or close to a final number by then. And so hopefully at that point in time we can ask them for an updated report on that. And I'm getting a nod from Mark, so we should be able to get that information at that time and the process that's going to be followed by the city.
Do you have any insight as to when a decision will actually be made, yes or no, about the FEMA money, or has the decision already been made?
At this point in time, the city is leaning, the administration is leaning to accepting the FEMA dollars that they will eventually apply for. They still do not know what the total dollar amount is of the request, and we should have that figure closer by the end of June. And of course, all of the dollars, as they tabulate them, may not qualify for FEMA dollars. FEMA then has a point, it's my understanding, a couple of weeks to look at our claim request, and they will go through those numbers and determine what does qualify, what does not qualify. So there's more to come on this as we go forward. We will not have a total answer by the end of June, but we should have a very close figure where we are for dollars as well as for the process that the city's going to be handling or taking.
From what you just mentioned, it sounds like that it's now just a matter of how much we want to ask for, instead of whether the City Council will actually be involved. Is that
as
fair to
far
say?
as I know, it's an administrative decision. The council will not be involved in the decision whether or not to accept the dollars or not to accept the dollars. That's my understanding. And at this point in time, it's also my understanding, with talking with the administration and with Tracy, if I'm not mistaken, that they do plan on going ahead and submitting the dollars that we can underneath the formula set forward by FEMA.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Jameson.
I would follow up on that conversation that it's kind of, if I could add, I think it's a lot like applying for a grant. And once you've applied for it, you've kind of already accepted the mentality that you're going to accept it. But, you know, you just probably shouldn't forget that you certainly have the authority to introduce a resolution suggesting and, you know, creating a stance that says we shouldn't accept it. But, so you still have that role that you could play.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Anything else from the council? One other thing I do want to mention is that I did ask the councilors last week to please submit your committee requests, if you would, to me by the end of this week. I would like to work on those this weekend, get a hold of you with the committee appointments that I would like to assign. So I know a couple of councilors have talked to me, so please get that to me by the end of the week, if you would. I do want to make a public announcement on the committee assignments at next Tuesday's informational meeting. Councilor Anderson, did you have anything else?
Since we have Mark Cotter here, Could we ask him to come up to the podium for a minute for one question on the Operation Timber Strike?
Sure. Mark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Cotter. I just wanted you to update the public on where we're at with Operation Timber Strike. I believe the pickups are completed, but I still see people putting wood and tree droppings in their front yards and in the gutters of some of our streets. So maybe if we give them a little update here, they'll know what to do.
Right. Okay, thank you. We're essentially what we're in the punch list stage, so we often use that terminology when you build a project and you're essentially substantially complete. You walk back through the building, you start to identify a few things that need to be done. That's what we call a punch list. So we've drove the areas, and our debris management teams are in the punch list stage. And so we're planning to wrap up the debris pickup very, very soon. Our goal is this week. The grinding operation's gone really well. They went to one of the largest sites to start with, the Madison site, over by just north of the fairgrounds. They've ground the first site, and they're in the process of hauling off all the mulch to their staging yard. Then they'll move to the Lion site and grind that one next. That is expected to take about a week, and then they're going to move down to the street department site, and that's expected to take about 5 weeks. So the grinding aspect is going really well. The last thing is that we're still identifying a few hangers in those trees that are either hanging over the street or over the sidewalk. Very few, but we're in that wrap-up mode as well. So Operation Timber Strike's going really well, but we're essentially still in the punch list stage and working feverishly to wrap it up.
So you would say the deadline would be Friday, Saturday?
Oh no, the deadline was already set. And so what we've already told them is that for the east side there was a certain deadline,
Right.
and the west side there was a deadline. And once we drove past your place, it was, we certify the road and then it's done. And so the majority, and I mean the majority of the city is done. We're just essentially in that punch list stage. A lot of times a punch list may be if we dispatch one of the tree cutters to go and trim one of the hangers, then we put that debris pile on a punch list that series has to run back and pick up. But for the most part, they've done really well. I continue to take different routes to and from work, and anytime we go and check out a project, and I mean the city's really clean. So I think a lot of people have hauled their own branches. There's very, very few piles I see out there.
Okay, so your recommendation for those people is to pick up their piles and take them to the landfill?
Landfill, 69th and Cliff, or the street division. The landfill's open 6 days a week. The others are still open 7 days a week. And we're about ready to start demobbing those, at least probably on Sunday hours, but not yet. We're still giving people until we're done. We'll keep those sites open that time as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cotter. All right, we'll move on to the next presentation. We do have one this evening. We will have a little bit of a abbreviated evening too, because there will not be a fiscal committee meeting following this session. So we'll be back at 7 o'clock for the council meeting. And we do have a proposed wastewater rates and charges ordinance revision, and we have Director Mark Cotter, Director of Public Works Trent Lubers, Utility Operations Administrator, and Mark Perry, Wastewater Superintendent. Trent, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, City Council. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Trent Lubers, Office of Public Works, and Mark Perry will be co-presenting with me also. We're here to answer your questions tonight about the ordinance proposal that we're taking forward. We've talked a lot about wastewater regionalization over the last couple of years. In 2010, this body actually commissioned by resolution a study for us to look at wastewater regionalization as a concept for our area. So a couple of things to keep in mind as we go forward is wastewater infrastructure is usually the first infrastructure that goes in the ground, but it's a very expensive process. And as technology changes and regulations changes, that wastewater infrastructure, that wastewater treatment technology continues to get more expensive. And all communities are going to face these costs going forward, not just the City of Sioux Falls, but those regional communities are going to see those changes in the characterization of their waste streams and future regulation that are really going to take those existing treatment technologies like wastewater treatment lagoons and those types of things, and it's going to push it to the next level where they're going to have to invest in significant infrastructure to treat their wastewater. And then also they're combated with, they're also growing along with the City of Sioux Falls, and so that growth is putting pressure on their existing wastewater systems, and so they need to go to that next level. So as we looked at wastewater regionalization, I wanted to talk a little bit about the regional concept. And what is regionalization, and why are we looking at regionalization? Well, it's really a method to provide wastewater services regionally that reduces that redundant investment in infrastructure. And as you spread that cost out into a single facility, it really provides an economy of scale for all those customers in that region. It's a situation that will reduce costs for everyone or stabilize those costs because you're spreading them out over a larger group. It's that economy of scale principle. So you're really looking at a win for all customers. Regionalization is not something that's new for the City of Sioux Falls. We have a regional landfill that serves the 5 counties. We have a regional library system, and the City of Sioux Falls actually participates in the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System. So again, it's not a new concept from the standpoint of how we've invested in those redundant or potentially redundant infrastructures in the past. This is just a new concept as it pertains to wastewater treatment for the region. So something else to think about is, in effect, through individual agreements, the City of Sioux Falls is already a regional provider. We provide wastewater services to 2 sanitary districts, the Prairie Meadow Sanitary District, which is on the west side of town, and the Render Sanitary District, which is just north of town along Cliff Avenue. And also 2 communities. The City of Brandon has been a longtime customer to the City of Sioux Falls for wastewater services, and Harrisburg since 2009 has been discharging their wastewater to the City of Sioux Falls. So as we did this project, some of the key concepts or outputs that we wanted from this project is really to establish the magnitude of the regional system. What does a regional system look like? How far out do we go? I should actually go back a slide. And so what you see here, the green area is about a 10-mile radius around the City of Sioux Falls. And we picked 10 miles because from an interjurisdictional agreement standpoint, that's a very comfortable place for us to be. So that's one of the reasons that we have that. So there are a lot of communities in that area. The other key output that we have is to develop policies and governance for a connection. If you choose to come to the City of Sioux Falls with your wastewater service, what policies are in place, what governance principles are in place to allow for that connection to happen. To establish a cost for a unit of capacity, a capital cost for a unit of capacity. One of the things that came out of that connection with Harrisburg in the 2010 study that was asked for by this body was, what does that capital cost? What does it cost if we have a unit of capacity, and how is the City of Sioux Falls going to be reimbursed for that cost, for that unit of capacity, which is one of the outputs of the study, and then an operational cost, a true operational cost. And Mark Perry will take you through some of those details later, but I kind of wanted to talk from an overarching standpoint. So we've talked a little bit about, since 1976, that we've been providing wastewater services, but we've also been through a very methodical process since 2010. We've engaged stakeholders in the region. Everybody inside of that green area that you saw on the previous map, we've certainly talked to them, and they've been invited to community meetings, and their input has been heard, and we've taken them through the regional process, and they're very familiar with the output. We've also worked closely with the South Dakota DENR. We've had great support from them, and Secretary Perner from the South Dakota DENR, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, has come out in favor. They see what this means for the state of South Dakota. They have limited resources to share to build wastewater infrastructure, to subsidize that wastewater infrastructure to meet their goals, their environmental needs. And so this consolidation really helps them provide that public funding to a more localized area. We worked with the Southeast Council of Governments, and they've been involved. East Dakota Water District has been involved. They provided some grant funding along with the DENR to help us do this study. The city's Infrastructure Review and Advisory Board, that's certainly a group that certainly has some consideration as it comes to this process, and the HBA, the Home Builders Association, has also been involved, and we've had dialogue with them as far as what this looks like, because obviously they're not just the HBA for Sioux Falls, but the Sioux Empire, so they're a regional entity also. So as we worked through this process and we developed our governance policies and we developed a rate methodology and some structures, one of the things as we did our research is we discovered that the South Dakota legislation was not really firm in providing the enabling legislation for us to go forward and enter into these agreements where we capture some of these capital costs in the methodologies that we wanted to use. So another action that we needed to take was to develop some legislation. And with the help of the South Dakota Municipal League, who helped us prepare and advocate for this legislation, we took this to the South Dakota State Legislature during this legislative session. During that legislative session, through committee, Senate committee, House committee, on the floor, and signature of the governor, throughout that entire process, there was one no vote. So again, when you look at all the entities that have been involved with this, the support from the council to actually commission the study, and the legislature support of passing the enabling legislation, you can see that there's been a broad level of support. One of the things that I should also share that I neglected is when we took that legislation forward, we went to the Harrisburg City Council, and we went to the Brandon City Council, as well as this council, and asked them for a resolution of support to make sure that they were on board and they understood wastewater regionalization. And all three of those bodies passed a resolution of support of the legislation that we took forward. Some key concepts to remember, and this essentially is what the South Dakota legislative change is. It allows us to charge for usage of the sewer. It allows us to charge for the capital costs, and that's really a new concept, and that was a big piece of this legislative session. This is that capital portion, or that cost to capacity, and what that cost is and defined. So through agreement, we're able now to charge for capital costs. We're able to charge for debt service. We can collect for the cost of interest on the money that is borrowed by the citizens of Sioux Falls and the City of Sioux Falls to develop and build sewer. There's a rate of return built in, because essentially if the City of Sioux Falls builds and takes on debt for capacity, there's a certain amount of risk, so that rate of return is built in and allowed by the state legislation, and it allows us to plan for future capital. So Mark Perry's going to take you through some details, but I wanted to again touch upon some key concepts from regional wastewater. First of all, Sioux Falls retains ownership of the system. Right now, we're 96% of the flow contribution of the system. And so we retain the ownership. It's a regional system and we're a regional provider, but this body makes the decisions for the system. This body sets the rates for the system. It's not an independent board or anything like that. It really prepares the framework to address future requests for wastewater connection, so that as a community takes a look at what their wastewater options are, they can voluntarily hook up to this system. They're not required to hook up to this system. But now there's a financial and a governance framework in place, so that as a community, I can take a look at the Sioux Falls option and look at what the costs are associated with that. And I can also take a look at what it's going to cost me to develop wastewater infrastructure and treatment, and the cost of personnel to run that treatment system, and the electrical costs and all that, and really look at that from a cost-benefit ratio and see what option works best for them. The other key concepts are, it's an economy of scale issue. Again, if you look at the city of Lenox and the city of Harrisburg and the city of Brandon, all building separate small wastewater treatment systems and asking for public assistance and putting that debt and that cost on top of a smaller customer base and applying that onto the rates that each one of those individual communities pay, it's significant and it's very expensive. If we can share those costs and provide that economy of scale over a broader base, the region benefits by having more money available for our consumers, where they're not applying it to debt for infrastructure that's redundant for all the different communities. And when you really boil the wastewater regionalization down, the two key outputs in the ordinance that Mark's going to take you through is we have that cost to capacity, that capital cost, which is a system development charge, and a regional cost of operating the system. And that is the same for each community going through, and the system development charge is a one-time charge, and that's the same for each community going through. So Mark will take you through a little bit of the specifics related to rates and the specifics related to that capacity charge. And then we have our legal team here and we have our consultant here to help answer your questions at the end of Mark's presentation.
Thank you, Trent. Mark Perry, Wastewater Superintendent, City of Sioux Falls. Like Trent said, I'm going to go through some of the details of the proposed ordinance. Some of the key revisions that we had, we dealt with a lot of definitions in there. Second, the two key components that Trent mentioned were regional customer rates and the system development charges. I'll talk about those. Another thing we established was a system development charge account to put that money into. And then also, as a cleanup item on the ordinance, we eliminated the repair and replacement fund that was originally established as an EPA grant requirement back when the treatment facility was first built. So to first talk about the determination of the rates. We've been here before with you, and we've discussed the rates with you in the past. And I think we've talked about the postage stamp approach. And that is, we wanted to treat the regional customers the same way that we treat our own customers. If one of our customers is 10 miles away from the treatment plant, they pay the same amount as somebody 10 feet away from the treatment plant for treatment. So all the regional customers are paying the same base rate, and the base rate is $3.89 per 1,000 gallons. There's also two other components with the rate for the regional customers, and that is a credit for equalization and a credit for treatment. And you'll ask, why is that? Well, for equalization, a good example of that is when we recently had the heavy rains and we didn't need to receive any more flow to the treatment plant. We can ask for those communities to hold back water if they have equalization available in their system. So that's a benefit to the City of Sioux Falls, so we don't get inundated with excessive water. And that's a benefit to them. So in the ordinance, we provide them a credit back for equalization of 43 cents per 1,000 gallons. Also, there's three main components for treatment. If those are met, they're allowed a credit back for treatment. Since our wastewater treatment plant is receiving a lot lower strength wastewater from them, we're able to give them back a credit for that treatment component, and so they can lower the rate in that way, and yet we still receive the money that we need to operate and maintain that treatment facility. And another item that's in the ordinance is the rate of return. The rate of return is a component that was put in so that our local customers will never pay more for the regional system than the regional customers pay in to us. There will always be a rate of return because the City of Sioux Falls takes on the risk of owning everything, the whole regional system. So we worked with our experts in the study and came up with what was nationally accepted, and that rate of return is around a 10% difference between what our local customers pay and what the outside regional customers pay for rates. The next major component in the ordinance is the system development charge. This is probably one of the more important aspects of that ordinance. It captures the capital cost of capacity-related assets. This is something that we haven't had with the regional customers in the past. We've just had rates. And so by doing that, I should back up a second. The way that's set up is on an equivalent residential unit. And what the equivalent residential unit basically is a single-family home. So for every single-family home that's added by a regional customer that comes in, they'll owe $2,391 per home to the City of Sioux Falls. And in the ordinance, there's a chart that splits that out and simplifies that into water meter sizes, which equates to the number of single-family homes. And so for water meter sizes of 5/8 to 3/4 inch meters all the way through 4-inch water meter sizes, there's a graduated scale of the costs for each water meter size. So that sets us up for collecting back from those regional customers the capacity-related charges for the regional system. And with that, like I said before, there's also a regional or an SDC account that those funds go into. And every year in the ordinance it states those regional customers are required to provide us with a quarterly report on their water meters that they put in and the water meter sizes, and then an annual report that we'll utilize to bill them at the end of the year. So they'll be billed on an annual basis for those system development charges. The collection of those SDCs is a local decision for those entities, and that's entirely up to them. With the City of Sioux Falls, we currently go with our cost recovery system, and it's been working for us for over a 30-year period, and it's also allowed by state law. So with that, our implementation path forward. We're here at the June 4th informational meeting. Next step is the June 11th and 18th meeting for first and second reading and the potential adoption of this ordinance. And if that occurs, July 11th is the date on when the ordinance would be officially adopted and would be put into place. And that coincides close with when the state law for that state statute that Trent talked about earlier and had the slide on. That state statute will be official on July 1st, 2010. And then after that, we plan in July to go back to the regional customers and with the draft template agreements that we have now, go to them after we have the official ordinance and work with them to come up with the finalized agreements with those customers. So with that, we have time to answer all the questions that you have of us, and we would welcome any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the council? Councillor Staggers, please.
The federal government in past years has really been involved in regionalization. Are we going to be getting any federal money or anything for this project?
The federal government actually, through block grants, funds wastewater and other infrastructure through the SRF program through the states. There's not a direct, back in the 70s and 80s when the Clean Water Act came in, there was a program to meet those standards called the Construction Grants Program. And they really started phasing away from that Construction Grants Program in the late 70s, and into the 80s they started the SRF, State Revolving Fund Program. And so they provided seed money there. They provide low interest loans and grants through the SRF program. And that's really how the federal government funds this type of infrastructure.
Also, too, just taking an example I was thinking of here about Worthing, South Dakota's within the 10 miles that you had on your chart or map. And let's suppose that we're going to have Worthing become part of this. Worthing, the people of Worthing are not going to pay the 100% of the capital costs to get the pipe from Worthing to Sioux Falls. Is that right?
No, they would be responsible for the conveyance system or the pipe to connect to those various areas. And I'm sorry I don't have that slide tonight, but we actually developed a map of places or potential connection areas that regional customers or potential regional customers connect to. It is the regional customer's responsibility to get to that connection point. So it would be at the expense of Worthing to get to that regional connection point.
Worthing, though, where would the connection point be at?
It would probably be someplace in southern Sioux Falls, close to the Sioux River South interceptor. There's also, thanks, Mike. So Worthing can actually come up and they can connect over to the east side sanitary sewer. Worthing could actually work with Harrisburg and T if they wanted to develop a cost recovery and a situation where they wanted to share the infrastructure cost to connect. That's certainly a potential. There's also a connection point. We talked about that Sioux River South interceptor, which is that loop that comes down around through Yankton Trail Park. There's a potential and option for them to connect there also.
so we can tell the citizens of Sioux Falls that they're not going to be paying a dime worth of capital costs for Worthing to hook up to our system. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, that their infrastructure costs to connect to the regional system are Worthing's alone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jameson, please.
Trent and Mark, the idea of providing sewer throughout this area seems to certainly change the value of land when you have the ability to get sewer. And, you know, some communities are strapped, they can't grow anymore because they can't add on to their treatment facilities. You know, when I'm just looking at this, I see the wastewater service as a perfect opportunity for this regionalization, but what about, I don't understand probably, the network of providing water in the same fashion. Is that because it's duplicated through different routes and other ways? But they always seem to go together.
Well, I think it's not necessarily a bad point. And if you think about Lewis and Clark Regional Water, and Lewis and Clark Regional Water 25 years ago, they were having this discussion. And, you know, communities like Beersford and Harrisburg and some of the small rural water entities, they actually made that arrangement, and they contracted with Lewis and Clark and became members of Lewis and Clark, just like the City of Sioux Falls, to secure that water. So in some ways it's happening. Is Sioux Falls the provider for a regional water solution for everyone? No, but it is happening. And
okay, that makes sense. That's right. Okay, and one other question.
Please.
When people hook up and they charge you, they charge that $23.91, at $2,300 for every single family who hooks up. How do you know that they've hooked up? How do you know, there's a development going on out west or south, and, you know, there's a neighborhood being built. How do you?
And this is part of the process of entering into, Mark referred to it a little bit, but we have a template agreement that we'll sign with each community. So you'll get to see each one of those template agreements each time, and this council will get to approve those agreements. But essentially what they'll do through contract is each regional community will need to provide us with, by I believe the end of January or middle of February for the previous year, they'll need to provide us a roll of new water meters that are added. If you're a new community coming in, you have to provide us a roll with the water meters and the sizes that you have already. And so then the system development charge based on meter size gets applied to each one of those meters. So we'll process that information. So they'll give us, let's take the city of Harrisburg, for example. So Harrisburg in 2014, if they become a customer of ours, they build 100 homes, and they build 100 single-family residential homes with the single ERU of $2,391. In January, they'll provide us a list of all the water meter customers that they have. We'll calculate that against the list that they have, and they'll be responsible to reimburse the City of Sioux Falls or the regional system $231,000 or $239,000. I can't do my math today, but 100 times the ERU, 230, I'm sorry. But for each one of those 100 meters, they'll be responsible, and we'll do that with each community going forward. And they're actually set up by contract in the template agreement to do that. And there's also some deadlines and some penalties for them if they don't meet those deadlines in the ordinance and in the agreements. If they do not meet those deadlines, then there's an interest or a financial penalty on them for not paying and truing up.
Please, one more.
I would only add that that's all good. I get that. That's like with the Metro Management Council, we're supposed to be reimbursed with dollars that are collected with every new phone line that's hooked up with the carrier. But we found through this process that we didn't have the authority to go in and check their books. We just had to rely on their. And so all I'm saying is. Certainly, I know all this would be entered in good faith, but don't give up on the fact of requesting some authority or some ability to get into those.
I believe we would cover ourselves legally with the agreement so that we would have the ability to.
Right to audit.
Yeah, right. We would have the right to audit, and as they enter, and we have that's certainly covered. So thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Councillor Erpenbach, please.
That was one of my questions, was how do we know? You know, that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah, everybody's over here going, yeah, me too. My other question then is, are we going to make any money on this? Is this something that will, I mean, you talked about each of us as customers not paying any more than the Harrisburg customer, but will the city make a little cash off of the surrounding communities?
Well, I really wouldn't look at it from the standpoint of us making cash. What I really would look at it from the standpoint of us utilizing the cash that's available more efficiently. Will we see, like when Harrisburg hooks up, they have 1,400 or 1,500 equivalent residential units right now. And so when Harrisburg enters into this new agreement, they're going to have to pay 1,500 ERUs to the City of Sioux Falls. It's to the tune of $3.7 million. And they're on board. They certainly know what the numbers are, and they've secured a place on the state water plan to finance that investment for them. And so I really wouldn't look at it from the standpoint of it's a way for us to make money, but if you put more cash into the system when those connections come on board, it does delay some of the costs associated with that and that type of thing. So if Harrisburg comes in with $3.7 million, I'm going to get into the weeds and I'm sorry, but a certain amount of that SDC revenue can be used to service existing debt. And existing debt is serviced. The interest payments and the principal payment for that debt is serviced with the rate income. And so if you can use, if you have an influx of cash from a large addition, like Harrisburg comes in with $3.7 million, you can offset some of the costs associated with that debt that's being applied to rates. And if you don't need to invest in the capacity because you have capacity available in the near term, it has a rate easing effect. And that's what I talked about before, is really this is a win for everyone because it has a reduced impact on not only the level of infrastructure and debt that you have to take on, the region has to take on, but also it has some ability to pay off that debt sooner and have a stabilizing impact on rates.
Thank you. One more, please.
Just one more, just a comment, and I don't misunderstand. I totally support regionalization. When it comes to that idea of sharing and being good neighbors, you know, not only are we using our resources better, but we're going to conserve what we do have in this area and make it a better place for all of us. Eventually, we're all going to be one big town anyway, right? We'll all be kumbaya, right? So, thanks.
I do want to share one thing, and again, I wouldn't necessarily look at it as, Mark talked a little bit about the rate of return and that there's a certain interest rate built in. And another way to look at that is a risk premium. If you add a bunch of capacity onto the system, and you have the debt service that's associated with that, and so that's built into the rate structure for everyone. The City of Sioux Falls has some risk premium associated with that because we're essentially taking on debt. We're still the owner of the system, and so the City of Sioux Falls is taking on debt for that capacity, and so we've built that risk premium in to manage that risk for the City of Sioux Falls and make sure that we protect our customers as much as we can.
Councillor Anderson.
Trent, I just wanted you also to explain the other option for communities of not joining this system and some of the financial impacts to those communities when they have to upgrade their sewer systems on their own.
I can share an example, and I'm not going to share specific numbers, but I'll share an example. The City of Lenox, the receiving stream that they discharge their wastewater into, the characterization changed. And what that means is the state of South Dakota took a look at that stream and they said, okay, look, you need to have higher requirements on the level of treatment that you provide on your wastewater before you discharge to that stream. And so the City of Lenox made a significant investment, over $3.5 million into a new mechanical wastewater treatment system. And they spread that out over a small group of people. I mean, the City of Lenox doesn't have a lot of residents, and so they have to service the debt and that initial capital cost. And so when you do that, let's say the City of Lenox, before that, their sewer bill was $35 a month. And again, I'm just throwing numbers out. Please don't, but let's say it doubled. So that's $35 a month, every month out of every resident in the City of Lenox's pocket that they can't use to support the local economy or whatever they want to do with that. They're paying that to that utility to service that debt. And so that's one of the options that a community has, is if they want to be independent of the regional system and if they want to make an investment into their own system and have those costs and have that as a community asset, they can certainly do that, but there are costs associated with that. And this method provides the financial principles so that they have financials to evaluate and make that decision going forward. So they can, if they decide to go at their own and that's something that they want to do, they certainly can. But now they can really take a look at the financials and see what the impact is on their customers.
Thank you.
Councillor Karski.
Thank you. I might have missed this, but I just want to make sure I understand going back and that they reimburse us for the past capital, infrastructure that we've built. But eventually, we're going to run out of capacity. We got to increase. I mean, if you look at your map and our city grows by a mile in any direction, we're adding Garrettson, we're adding Humboldt, we're adding Chancellor, potential customers. How does this formula look at going forward and having to add new infrastructure?
Sure. And the system development charge has two components. First of all, it's split in between collection and treatment. And in that collection and treatment, there's a reimbursement component for that existing capacity that's there. And then there's also an improvement component. And so you're really taking a look at that 5-year CIP, that 10-year CIP. We're having conversations going forward with the regional communities based on the level of growth and development that they're having, so that we're planning just like we do our 5-year CIP, and we have that unwritten 5-year CIP in wastewater is a 10-year plan, so that we know what we're looking at 10 years from now. We're having those conversations, and those costs are all built in to the SDC. So 10 years from now, if there's a major asset that needs to be added, the system development charge is going to change, because that look back for reimbursement for existing capacity is still there, but it's also that future capacity that you're going to have to add. And so that number is going to be looked at probably no more than every 5 years, but no less than every 3 years, so that we have a living document and we continue to build the funding that we need to go forward.
If I could follow up to that then. Recently, the City of Sioux Falls joined the South Dakota retirement system, and that was a one-time in, no out. So if a city comes in, do they have an out? I mean, is it a contract of a certain length? Because if going forward we have a big capital infusion need, and they say, well, we're not part of that?
They certainly can terminate their contract. They cannot continue with the City of Sioux Falls. But when they purchase an SDC and they make that capital purchase and that capacity purchase, that funding stays with the City of Sioux Falls. There's no reimbursement for pulling out at the end of their contract. So if they're buying capacity and they continue to buy capacity, it's in their best interest to stay with the City of Sioux Falls, because they purchased that capacity already.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Stegers, please.
Yes, using the example of Worthing again, they're going to be paying for the cost to build a pipe from Worthing to Sioux Falls. Now, that pipe, that becomes ours, the City of Sioux Falls, or how does that work?
No, sir. The pipe from the City of Worthing to that connection point in the regional system still belongs to Worthing. Harrisburg right now, they built a large lift station and a force main that connects somewhere down on Highway 11. If you think about Frankman Motors, it's in that general area. And that force main and that pump station and that infrastructure to get the wastewater there belongs to the City of Harrisburg, and it's their responsibility.
And then also too, okay, so we have Worthing hooking up with Sioux Falls. They have their pipe to Sioux Falls. Now, when Worthing starts to get larger and they build more underground pipe, that pipe belongs to them. Is that right, in Worthing?
That's correct. The local collection system and any infrastructure that's put in place to hook up to the regional system belongs to and is managed by the City of Worthing. So their collection system is still local.
Okay, so in essence, it sounds like what we're doing here with regionalization is just Sioux Falls itself is just saying, hey, we're willing to take all the stuff from your pipe and send it through our wastewater treatment plant. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think a better way to look at that is if Worthing continues to grow and they're discharging wastewater into a small receiving stream. I'm not sure. I think they discharge into 9 Mile Creek, which ends up in Lake Alvin. And if they continue to grow, or they have an industrial opportunity or something like that, that they want to provide wastewater infrastructure for, if they don't have the characterization of the stream or the treatment capacity to do that, they need to make a major investment. And so they still can do that, and they can make that decision on their own. I believe that regionalization provides an economy of scale where when Worthing takes a look at the financials, it's going to be less expensive for them to extend a pipe to the regional collection system for the City of Sioux Falls and go to one of the regional wastewater treatment plants.
So once again, in essence, we're just taking their wastewater from Worthing and running it through our treatment plant. That's basically our main commitment?
That is correct. We would have a contract obligation to do that, and we would be getting reimbursed for the cost of the infrastructure or the capacity to provide that for them.
Great. Thank you very much. Any other questions? If not, I don't believe there's really anything else before us at this point in time. Just a reminder that we will be back at 7 o'clock for for the City Council meeting. And I would like to thank the team for coming and making their presentation. Thank you very much. It is somewhat exciting. I still don't quite understand how you guys get excited by that kind of stuff. Okay? But good job. Anyway, that being said, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.